Welcome to How to Create a Virtual Machine in Azure, Part 1, the easy way. My name is Brian Kafferkey. You can find my content on github.com/bkafferkey/shared. That's the link right there. And there's really not much here, just a few slides. Most of this is demo, so I wouldn't worry too much about the content at this point. And a few things, of course, if you're familiar with my videos, I tend to do a lot of branding, so I'm wearing my Power BI shirt, if you can see that. And I'm drinking out of my Azure mug or travel mug, which was actually a gift when I left my last team at Microsoft, and got my hat, which was done at a Microsoft thing. And you'll notice that I now have a Grateful Dead button. I was on vacation last week, and there was a Grateful Dead shop, and I'm a Deadhead, so had to get the button and everything. I've seen the Grateful Dead about 10 times when Jerry Garcia was still alive. Have not seen them since. Just it doesn't seem the same without him in the band. All right, so let me jump in here. Where are we going to go in this? It's going to be short. I'm going to try to make this fast. I tend to be verbose, but I'm going to try to get through this quicker. We're going to just quickly discuss what a virtual machine is. We'll talk about the easy way to create the VM. I'm not going to talk about it, but we're going to do this in another video, part 2, which is the harder way to create a VM. And then we'll talk about connecting to your VM. All right, so first thing I want to just quickly mention when we talk about a virtual machine, that's what VM stands for, virtual machine. And the idea of a virtual machine is it's actually just kind of created through software. So we're using a program which culls out of all these computer resources in the cloud and creates something that's really a simulation of a computer, but it's not a physical box. It may consist of really probably a subset within a physical box, but it's actually virtual, hence the word. So if we look here, we can see, and you probably hear these buzzwords a lot around the cloud, IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. And to be honest, they come up with more and more all the time, and it's always AAS. So if you just remember something as a service, that's the last part, and then it's the first word. So IaaS stands for Infrastructure as a Service. And roughly, to me, when I think of infrastructure as a service, I think of sort of data center hardware as a service. It's a little overly simplified, but I think of a machine like a laptop or a server, which has the operating system and it runs stuff and it's complete service. And that's kind of where I see that. And so you can see over here, service and storage, network and fire, security, etc. And you can put a bunch together and sort of have this sort of data center within that. So that's where the cloud really started getting momentum. It really came from on-premises, where companies had learned things like VMware and different software like that would allow them to create virtual machines on their premises. And I know a lot of DBAs use that as a way to create multiple database servers that they could work with. And so in a similar way, once that idea caught on, they're like, well, if we can do that on premises, couldn't we just do that in the cloud? And then companies like Microsoft, Amazon, etc. thought, well, we can create a massive amount of hardware and allow people to create lots of VMs, very powerful VMs, etc. And that became IaaS. But it's going in more of a direction, especially I've seen at Microsoft, trying to add more value, because IaaS, at the end of the day, it's nice. You can get hardware quickly. You don't have to wait for people to buy it, bring it into your company and configure. But it doesn't give you the full value added that Platform as a Service does. What Platform as a Service does says you just want to use a certain resource, a certain software resource like SQL Server. Well, do you really want to have to worry about patching releases for security and upgrades? Do you want to worry about which version of the operating system it's running on? Do you want to worry about all these different pieces? Do you have to set up security, setting up backups and restores, etc.? So PaaS is something like Azure SQL DB, Managed Instance, Azure SQL Data Warehouse. Azure's in a lot of these words, right? So that's PaaS. Now, when you get to SaaS, that's kind of even a higher level abstraction. So I tend to think of things like when I use my Outlook mail, I go in, it's on the cloud, right? Because I don't see where it's storing things. I just go in, check my mail, and I can do it through my browser. So that's a sort of SaaS service. I also think that Azure Machine Learning Studio, which has a GUI front end within the portal and does things for you. You can create models and train them and everything with data science. And I don't really need to install anything, so that's really like software as a service. It's complete, turnkey, everything's there. So PaaS tend to be more utility orientated. Yeah, I can do a SQL database as a PaaS service, but I need to add other things around it to be really useful, right? I need to build an application that's going to use that. So it's more providing a sort of part of what would be an application, whereas Azure ML Studio is kind of everything's right there. So back to virtual machines and creating them. So the easiest way to create a virtual machine in Azure is to use the Marketplace. Microsoft has figured out that there are certain kinds of installations, configurations that people use servers for over and over again. It makes a lot of sense. So a lot of people, for instance, have servers that are database servers. Maybe it's SQL Server 2012, 2017, maybe the latest 2019, which I don't think is in GA yet, but it could be that. So when you do that, typically, you're going to install SQL Server, you're going to install the services and utilities, etc. So that would be one, and typically used to be on Windows, but now you can run that on Linux. So you choose that, or maybe you want to install an Oracle server or MySQL and Postgres. And surprisingly, you can get these things. I don't know about Oracle. I haven't seen that in the Marketplace. It's probably there as well. But I was just looking at MySQL and Postgres, and you can also install those as pre-configured. So you just say, I want this, and it installs all the software related to it for you on the operating system of your choice. So, and I have this little bubble to remind myself of something here, which is I highly recommend customers always start small, start simple, and start with development, testing kind of stuff. Don't put any real production data up in the beginning. You don't know what you're doing yet. I didn't when I started, so give yourself time to learn. Just learn how it works. You can use AdventureWorks to play around and experiment. When you create Azure SQL, that's a PaaS, but you can also get AdventureWorks there automatically. But you can install AdventureWorks on the VM. You can download it right from within the VM, and then you can play around and get used to using a virtual machine. Now, I will say, and I'll say this more, I'm not really an expert on security settings and things, and I'm going to be probably taking some weaker settings so that I can get the remote desktop to connect to the server. But if you're going to do this in production, I do put a disclaimer around this. Make sure you get professional advice on how to secure your solution. Microsoft people, infrastructure people within your company, what are the standards? How do they lock things down? A good idea to have it within a VPN and virtual networks, etc. So use all those things. I'm going to take some kind of shortcuts to demonstrate this. So there it is. And anything I do, anything I say, also I should also point out disclaimer. It's just my own views and advice. This is my own private channel. It's not Microsoft, so bear that in mind. So let's jump in and have at it. So I'm going to jump over to my browser. And what you see here is the Azure portal. And what I want to do here is create a resource. So there's many ways you can create the resource. I could click on this virtual machine part here and go in that way to create it. But I like to go here because if I use the plus create a resource button up here, then I can pretty much create anything I want. And since I want to create compute, I can click on that here. And you notice virtual machine is one of the things I can create. So I'll go in there. And one of the things I want to call your attention to, I can go in and just start keying in everything that I want specifically, and that's the harder way, which I'll walk through in another demo. But to take a shortcut, I'm going to go, and notice it's defaulting to an image Ubuntu. I actually made a mistake earlier and had it install Ubuntu, and then I had Ubuntu, and then I had trouble connecting to it because it didn't support RDP. So make sure you pay attention to what you're creating here. So I'm going to use, I clicked on Browse All Public and Private Images. So these are virtual machine images. This is configurations that are, you can just say, yes, that's what I want, and install it. Now, one I particularly like is SQL Server 2017 Developer, and I'll show you that. And I like to say developer. If I can type in developer. And the reason I like it is because you can see you get a free SQL Server license with that. Again, it's strictly for development and testing, and you can do that. So you want to demo. It's great for like people working at Microsoft. You want to demo things. But if you don't want to have to pay for a SQL Server license, then that's a good way to go. Another way you can do things is to, I think you can install it and then tell them you don't have a license, and I believe it will ask you, it will charge you extra money for that. If you can, again, I would recommend going to the PaaS offerings like Azure SQL DB. But I'm going to go in and I'm going to pick 2017, and now notice it's automatically picking Linux, which is not what I want. So I'm going to type in Windows, and I'm going to put it 2017 on 2016 Windows Server. That looks good. Make sure you get the right configuration for what you want. I actually made the mistake earlier of picking the Linux one, and I didn't really want to use that one. And then I need to give it so here I need to pick, I've already picked the image. Now I'm going to say use my pay-as-you-go subscription. And a resource group is a way to sort of collect things. So a resource group is like a box. And imagine you go to the store or think of your shopping cart. You throw things in the box or shopping cart and it's all together. And if you decide you want to get rid of it, you can just delete or throw out the whole thing and everything goes with it. Really good idea to do that anytime you create something in Azure. I like to separate it out so that if I want to get rid of it, I can say get rid of everything related to this VM, or get rid of everything I created in my Azure Databricks workspace or whatever. It makes it easier. It's hard to sometimes pull out individual pieces to get rid of it, and there'll be some piece you forgot, but the resource group will tag everything together. So I'm going to create a new resource group. I'm going to call it RG underscore BPC SQL Server. I'll say 1. Make it fun. Say OK. That's going to be my resource group name. And by the way, if you type in something, it's not a valid value, you'll get errors here. So now I'm going to, what I like to do is say RG underscore and then the name of my service I'm creating, what I'm using, in this case the VM name. And then now for the actual name, I will just say BPC SQL Server 1. I like to do that because then I know that if I want to get rid of my VM BPC SQL Server 1, I'd go to the RG underscore and delete and get rid of everything. I could put VM in there to make it even clearer, but I like to try to keep things, as straight as possible when it comes to that. You got to pick the region you're in, and in my case it's East US 2. You want to pick the one closest to you. There's some redundancy options and stuff, availability zones and sets. Take a look at those. There's a link here you can go to and get more information on that, the availability options. But that's really a super resiliency thing, and I'm going quick and easy here, so it's lightweight and not critical. You can see we've picked an image, and I did the image first because I found when I made settings and then I went and picked an image, it cleared out my other entries, so I do that first now. Now I need to get, so when you have a virtual machine, you need to have an administrator that owns it, and that administrator is actually created from the portal side in Azure, so I have to tell who's really going to own this machine. So in this case, I will create this BP Carver key, give it a password, and then it will confirm you get the right password. Make sure you know what that password is and you don't lose track of it. You can also say public inbound ports, and highlight these things because it gives you some help. As I said, I'm not a really great security person. I know the basics, but you do want to be careful what you're opening up, what's allowed and stuff, because this is a public cloud. And so there's great ways you can secure things, and it's good to look them over and follow all this stuff and research the best way to make sure your environment's secure. In this case, I'm going to do something which is a little less than ideal for security. I want to allow me to connect into RDP, so I'm going to say allow selected ports, and you notice here I'm going to say RDP, and it's going to be on 3389, and it's warning you right here, these ports will be exposed to the internet. So there's ways you can do that. You can create a VPN and secure it that way and stuff. I'm going to be a little less secure here, and I'm warning you that I'm doing that, but I just want to show you how this whole thing works and get things going. There's all kinds of things in here. You can have hybrid things, but I'm not going to worry about that. Now it says, do you have a Windows license? I'm going to say no. And what that means is I'm going to get a little extra cost because I have to pay as I go for a Windows license. But it's just like a little slice. It's not like I'm going to pay for the entire Windows license forever type thing up front. So I've got that. You can go through one by one. It's like a little wizard here. So I can say what type of hard disk do I want. A lot of times for like this, I would go standard HDD. Like it's slow, but I want cheaper cost. I'll go with the premium. Why not? I'm not going to keep this around long. Let's see, what else do I have here? Okay, and we have managed disks, which means Microsoft's Azure's going to take care of managing those disks and stuff for us. Makes our life a little easier. All right, now we're in networking. Again, it's telling us we've exposed things. I'm just going to take the defaults. I think we're good. And you could just go directly to review and create, but you can see all these different things. First time I created a virtual machine, I was actually surprised because I forgot how many things there are involved in creating a machine. And typically, if you've ordered one from like Dell or somebody, most of it's pre-configured and ready to go. So it was a little weird, like, wow, I've got to have, IP addresses set up. I have to have NICs set up, network cards, and all these pieces, and really look through this. So it's a good idea. Those images kind of help you get going. Now here's a really important feature, highly recommended. If you've got nothing else out of this, this will be valuable. When you're in Azure, and this is pretty much true of everything, it's like electricity. You have all this computing resources, you turn it on, it's good to go, and you pay. However you pay, you're going to pay for what you're using. But when you're done, you can turn it off, and that's especially true of VMs. And what we're going to do here is set up enable auto shutdown. And you can see what that means is this VM, if it's running, it will turn itself off at this time every day. And if it's not running, it doesn't have any effect. It's just not running. You don't pay for it when you're not running. I don't think there's any cost. If you had extra blob storage or something, maybe there's some small cost there. But I've noticed that when I've run VMs and I'm not running them, I don't pay anything. So it's a great thing. And you can really spread it out. I've run VMs, for a couple hours here and there just to do some things, turn them off, and then I pay a few bucks. You'll see the cost is actually pretty cheap. I think in the end you'll see a VM cost estimated. I think it's like 100 and something a month for this VM, so it's pretty cheap. But take a look at it. I also recommend to customers create the resources. Customers always want to know how much will it cost, how much will it cost, and it's kind of like imagine you're in an office building, and they say how much is it going to cost us for electricity for this year. And I'm going to be like, well, do you have air conditioning? How hot are the summer days? Are you going to be using it a lot? Do you have electric heat? What is going on in the building? It's very difficult to estimate. So the best thing I recommend is start out like I'm doing here with a development machine, play around, see what it's costing you. I was shocked at how cheap it can be if you remember to turn things off. So this auto turn off is not a small thing, and there's a lot of places you can do that. So take advantage. So I'm going to say auto shut off, but I'm not really a big fan of using UTC here. I'd like it to be my time. So I'm going to go over here and set this to Eastern Time US because I'm in the Boston area. All right, and I'm going to say, okay, that should be good. I'm just going to go to, I think we're good. So this stuff should be all right. I'm not going to really worry about that. Security settings, etc. Okay. Oh, the other thing I'll mention, you can create tags. So for instance, maybe I want to have something, a lot of times in a company, you want to maybe have something like, am I in the right place? Maybe I want to have something like cost center. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it's really nice because by doing that, you can track it. So if you could have scripts and things like in PowerShell that will look for a tag like production and another, like maybe it's a VM type production dev. And then you could turn them off through a script that looks through them all, gets a collection of all the VMs, which are development machines. It's Friday night. You don't want to pay for them over the weekend, and you can just turn them off. It could be anything, or it could be you want to make sure that they're in a cost center that's valid or something. So tags are kind of handy that way. Okay, and we could create more disks. I'm going to go back to disk for a minute. Premium, managed. Okay, I think we're good. Yep, I think we got that. Okay. Go to review and create. And you can see here it's basically saying you're going to pay about 97 cents an hour for this machine. It's got all the information we need on it. It's good to go. We could make changes to it, but we've got basically what we're looking for. And let's see. SQL authentication is disabled in this case. We can change that later on SQL Server if we want. We'll probably use just Windows authentication in this case, but we should have what we need. And I'm just going to say create. And you might need to play with this a little bit. Now what's going to happen here, you can see in the upper right there's this little bell, and that has like a log. You can see that will log messages as it's creating resources. And in this screen you'll see details about what's happening in the resources. So one thing I didn't get into too much, but you can add more disks and things like that as well in there. And you can also modify the virtual machine anytime you want. So if you said, oh, I really want to change the sizes, modify things, you can do that without destroying the machine. You don't have to start over. Okay, it still says deploying. You do have to wait until this deployment is done. And it can take anywhere from 5 to 7 or 8 minutes. That's about it. Pretty good, actually, if you consider that if you were in your company and you said, we need a new server. Companies I've been in, it take weeks just to get the physical box in, and then you get network people to set it up and hardware people to configure things, and then the DBAs have to look at it. And it can take a couple of months, really, in many places to get a machine from A to Z, and here it's 10 minutes. Now, what looking at that. Another thing that's kind of handy here is if I click on this template, nice thing is you might say, gee, I went through all the steps, I picked all these options, and this could be a very customized thing. That'll be the next demo I do. If I wanted to save it, I can go to template, and templates themselves are JSON files, which are name value pairs, which define, as you can see here, all the different values that will create this virtual machine. There's also a PowerShell one, and I can just go here, download it, and I'll have a script that can be run to recreate this on demand. So you could go in, take the script, and then make a couple little changes, like the name of the resource group, name of the server, and run it again. I personally, with using PowerShell, I like to make it a function, and then among the parameters add things like what resource group do I want to call it, what's the name of the machine, and you could add any number of options for parameters in there to make it easier for you. Like maybe you don't want RDP on, maybe you do, things like that. And you could have one general function. And the nice thing too is you might want to put in like a parameter like cost center. And maybe you make this a standard in your company, and I have a whole video on this, so go look at that. But in PowerShell, where you call a function and one of the required elements is a cost center, and you could look it up internally if you ran this on your local machine or wherever your cost center list is, and validate that it's a good cost center, etc. So a lot of things you can do there, but this is just a basic. It's going to give you a script that you can recreate the assets with. Okay, so you can see here, you can see all these pieces. Again, when I first got into this, I did PowerShell, but I hadn't done a lot with Azure. And then I was asked to do a presentation of all things at a global Azure bootcamp. I did not, this a few years back, didn't know much about Azure. So the first thing I actually did was try to create a script in PowerShell that would create a virtual machine. And I was successful, took a little playing around, and that's when I learned how many different pieces there are to a virtual machine. And I like the idea of having a function that remembered all that for me. So that's what I did. But the first place I started, even when I was automating in PowerShell, is going to the portal and stepping through it. So a little tidbit while waiting, but I like, if you're going to do anything with PowerShell to create any assets in Azure, I find it's usually a good idea to do it through the portal step by step, because then you get an idea of what are the pieces it needs. It needs, oh, I see it needs blob storage. Oh, I see it wants to know what's the operating system. In a VM case, all these pieces. And then when you create the same thing through a PowerShell script, you'll recognize it's almost the same exact stuff, only now you're doing it through commandlets. Okay, so the resource has completed, and this took longer than usual. I counted about 8 minutes, which is a bit long for creating a VM. But one of the things I can do is I can pin the resource to my dashboard, a really good idea. And then I can also say go to the resource, and I'll do that. That'll bring me right into it. And if you haven't used the portal before, when you typically create things, it has all these different property sets you can go to. And the right side is called the blade. So I'm looking at the overview blade, and you can see there's my resource group, right, that we created for this. You can see the subscription, etc. And one of the things I'm going to try to do is connect. Now, I will probably do this in a later video, talk about things like extending and modifying this more. Excuse me. For instance, adding disks to it and things like that. There's kind of a two-step process. You can go in here and add a disk, and I'll add one here just to kind of do this part of it at least. Create a disk, and I'll give it a disk name. I'll just call it disk 2. All right, good. And source type, since it's now I'm not actually copying it from anywhere, it's just going to be a brand new one. I'm going to change the size. Probably should have done this when I was initially creating it, but to be honest, when I was on that page, I didn't quite see where you did that, so I figured I'll wait and do it here. I'm going to do a 4 GB drive. All right, that should be good. I'm going to create that. Now there's another step you have to do actually within the virtual machine to connect to that and make it an actual drive you can use. But I'll put it here just to kind of lay the groundwork for this. But just that's the first step if you wanted to do this. Now that's a premium SSD drive. I could have chosen a less expensive drive. So validating it's running it now. You don't have to create a drive like this, but chances are if you're creating like a SQL server, you're going to have somewhere you're going to want to put your your disks on, etc. You might want to have like data storage. And notice this wasn't terribly big, 1 gigabyte. This isn't terribly big either. So, but at least it lets me, do what I want to do. Gives me some place to sort of store my maybe the data I'm going to stage into the database, etc. All right, this looks good. I'm going to go back to my overview page, and what I really want to do. Should I save that? Oh, I got to click save. So that way it will save my new disk. One thing you'll find also a lot of times in the portal, like UltraDisk and all these different new things are adding all the time, and a lot of times they're in preview. So if they're in preview, it's great to look at and to try out. Make sure it's at least in public preview if you intend to really go forward with it. I would say if it's production, wait for GA on something, general availability, but always good to kind of be in the early parts helping flesh it out, make sure it's what you need. I'm going to go back here, overview. What I want to do here is connect. And here you can see I've got RDP, make sure I got that. And I'm going to say download. Now if it switches automatically to SSH, which I had happen, just check that you didn't inadvertently make it under Linux if that's not what you wanted. I want it under Windows. I'm going to say download the RDP file, and I'll put it in my downloads, and there it is. Save. Then I'm just going to run it. And here I can say I don't want you to keep asking me about my connections. It's warning me. I'll say nah. And so what I can do here now is, now usually it comes up in the default account ID. I need to use the one that remember I told you when we created this, I created one as the systems administrator. That's the default login account. Once I get into the VM, I can add more users that can log in, but initially I'm going to need that. So I have to say use a different account so I can put it in here. And here I'll say that. All right, and there we go. So yes. And it's kind of interesting. Usually the first time it gets into a VM, there's still some initializing work going on. You have to give it a little bit of time. You might get a blank screen like this. I found on the data science VMs there's even more work going on. So sometimes you have to wait like 5 or 6 minutes. It even runs, in the case of the VMs I created, it was running a PowerShell script to set up environments and do things. So you have to give it a little bit of few minutes, not much, just to get that stuff set up. I do believe I have a video out there too, specifically on data science VMs, and there's really here I don't want to be looking on the network, people connecting to it, obviously, but you can create data science VMs, and those are particularly useful because there's a lot of different pieces you typically would have to install for data science. For instance, you may want to have SQL Server. You can have SQL Server with the machine learning server built in, which is nice. 2017 has that, but you also may want things like Python, and what typically the data science ones will install the Anaconda distribution. They'll give you RStudio, they'll give you VS Code. So they're assuming you want to build data science solutions. This is just kind of raw SQL Server is what I'm getting here. And typically it will pop up with the server manager when you get first into it. So if you're used to using, managing servers or anything with Windows, you're going to say, oh, this looks fairly familiar. Go here, and you can see it's got some software in here. And you can see here, for instance, I can go in here and say I'm going to connect to SQL Server Management Studio. That's going to take a couple of minutes because it's the first time, as you know, connecting to that. But I want to prove it's a real machine. We can do things in here. And I wanted to show the services for a minute just to confirm what's running and what is not. So if we kind of scroll down here, you can see Microsoft's agent. You can see SQL Server. What else? I don't know if the SQL Server is. Yeah. So you can see all the SQL Server things running. So here's your database engine, SQL agent, analysis services, integration services. Launchpad is the machine learning service. So that's pretty cool. So all these are running, and a lot of these, Launchpad, for instance, manual, it makes sense, but a lot of these are automatic. So it's a ready to go SQL Server, which is pretty cool, right? All right. And here you can see I can connect into my server name. I'm just going to connecting through Windows authentication, and since I'm the owner administrator, it actually sets it up so I can do that, which is nice because I don't have much to look at yet, the built-in system databases. So I could create databases from here. I could, this is a machine, so I could just as easily go into Explorer. Now I find the browser gets locked down pretty badly. I usually go out as soon as I can. I have to turn off security settings. Then I go out and find Chrome and bring Chrome in. It's actually easy to work with Chrome. and Explorer has been deprecated, I believe, anyway. Edge has been replaced with a Chromium kind of a equivalent. So it's from what I understand, that's really good, but I still use Chrome for that kind of stuff. It's a good browser. What can you say? You got to take good browsers where you can get them. So over here, we got this. I'm going to close out of here, but we got the idea. You can use that. You've got a full machine. I'm not going to get into some other things. I think maybe another video would be in order, maybe a third that actually talks about configuring users to get in and set. And I put a disk out there. There is another step I need to make it usable. I have to connect to it and all that stuff. So I'll do that in a different video. But we got the basics here, so I'm kind of excited for that. It's always cool to connect. First time in, you're like, wow, this is a real machine, right? It's a box. And in 2 minutes, I could delete the entire box, and it's all gone, and I'm not paying a cent. This is a really great option for especially small companies. I've been in places, and I've seen where they pay a lot of money to have somebody create VMs in some sort of a private cloud or some small back-end area, and it can be really expensive. And you saw how easy it was to do this here. You do need to learn a few settings, and there's things you can find online for the security and the VPN and setting some things up around it. But even though that's true, if you noticed, it's not that difficult to do. And one other thing I will show you, close this out and say that's all I got to do to get out of there. Now you are restricted to the RDP limit, so you can have 2 people logged in with RDP on a server at a time. One of the things I can do here is I can say stop the machine, and I won't be paying for it anymore. So I wanted to show you, or I could restart it if I have trouble. So we've got that. I think I set the resource health. I'm looking for the automatic. There it is. So if you look over here, the auto shutdown. So even if you forgot to do this, you can always go back and set it up. It's enabled 7 p.m. Eastern time. It's going to send a notification to me, to my email address, saying I'm about to shut this machine down. Again, especially if you're just playing around in development, definitely turn that on. You do not want to be getting billed for days. You forget to turn it off. I've done it. Not pretty. I was an MVP before. I had $150 on my MVP credit that I could use on Azure, and I left something running and it burned through it real quickly. VMs aren't really that bad, but the data science ones can add up a little bit, especially if you're using GPUs, which are always fun to do. So that's pretty much it here. Let me go back to my riveting slides. So we talked about creating a VM. We connected to the VM, and I didn't actually go through the pause and start, but you can see that it pauses it, takes a few minutes, and then you're not paying anything anymore, and then you can go back and just say start it again. So make sure you use that timeout option. So this is kind of reviewing what we covered. We talked about what is a virtual machine. It's just a box in the cloud. Acts like any other machine, but it's actually assembled through software, so it's not a real physical machine. You couldn't actually go touch that VM we created because it's done through software. It's magic. The harder, we're going to talk in the next one about the harder way to create a VM, which isn't really that hard. It's just that gives you all the choices. I'm just going to manually create a VM with the pieces I want as I want it, and I'm not going to install anything ahead of time. But take a look at the marketplace, because chances are it's got at least some of it started for you. Like if you're looking for MySQL or Postgres or something like that, or you want to install, I don't know, any kind of special software, take a look, because a lot of the vendors have set up configurations in here. We have for a lot of it, so you don't have to do that. We talked about connecting to your VM, and that's really it. So this will probably be one of my shortest videos yet, I hope. Gives you the basic, how to create a VM in Azure. I hope you see it as pretty easy, and I put a lot of caveats around security. I kind of left mine a little open with that, allowing RDP straight in. I didn't limit it to IP addresses. Typically, you would restrict it and say either it's a VPN thing where you're restricting, or you can just say I'm only going to allow these IP addresses, which would be the machines you want to get in. And that's another good idea, really, to restrict it so that anybody from anywhere can't just connect in. But I'm going to delete this quickly, and by the time you see it, that VM should be gone, and you won't be able to get in there anyway. So that's always good. Deleting a machine is the most secure thing you could do. All right. As always, please subscribe, share, connect, and thank you.